So what you're going to see in the slide is kind of a crazy chart, but every one of these bubbles represents a school district in America. There's 14,000 bubbles on this page, okay? And the size of the bubble is reflective of how many kids are in the district. And the horizontal axis is wealth, so richer to the right, less wealthy to the left. And the vertical is their state test scores put on a single scale so you can compare them. It's put on the NAEP scale if you're familiar with that. So what do you see here? You see a disturbing trend that basically says for every extra dollar in a household, your scores go up. In other words, every time you move to the right, your scores go up vertically, meaning more wealth associated with higher test scores in a disturbingly distinct relationship. That is a problem in America, right? And if you believe what's going on with income inequality, it's getting worse, right? So you could click through, Kava. And then, you know, the issue here is we focus on that trend, and I'm not sure that we're focusing so much on the dots that are at the top of the page. The dots at the top of the page are the people who are outperforming what their socioeconomic suggests they're capable of, okay? So again, click forward, please, Caitlin. So I think one of the issues is that we don't have high enough expectations for kids, which I'm sure you've heard in a number of different ways with a number of different pieces of research and books and news and everything else out there. And I wanted to point out just a more anecdotal example of how this plays out. The 2015 PISA data for math, which is a way to compare the United States math proficiency to the rest of the world, we're embarrassingly 38 out of 71. So we're middle of the pack despite spending more money than anything else among 15-year-olds in this country, so 10th graders primarily, okay? If you look at the bottom, what's interesting, TIMS, which is a different test, but directionally similar to PISA, trying to do the same thing, compare our results to the rest of the world. If you look at 4th and 8th graders, we are 14th and 10th. Okay, so we're not throwing parties for being 14th and 10th, but it is interesting that 14th and 10th is a respectable level. If you look at the countries, it's right in there with Switzerland, with Germany, with other places that are at a respectable level. So why is it by 4th and 8th graders are at a respectable level and 10th graders are at an embarrassing level? So why is that, right? I think a lot of it has to do with expectations. I think teachers, I think adults, I think parents, I think kids, they look at their socioeconomics, they look at whether your clothes are disheveled, they look at whether your family is English language learners, they look at assumptions perhaps about whether your grades were bad last year, whether your parents were difficult. We make a bunch of assumptions about people, and the way that plays out in math is the despicable term, I'm not a math person, right? I visit schools all the time. I've been told this gratuitously. I don't know how many times I'm not a math person. I think what happens is eventually those 4th and 8th graders begin to believe it, right? They begin to believe that they're not math people, that perseverance and hard work can't get them where they need to be. And so we create these expectations that underserve our children, and kids give up, and they believe that math is a function of the DNA lottery. You're a math person and you're not. You're a math person and you're not, as if it's a function of luck and happenstance. When in reality, so many kids are more capable of performing well in math, they just don't believe it. And part of it is because we as adults don't have those high expectations about what they're capable of achieving. Could you click forward, Caleb? So I'm not going to belabor the point here, but here are a lot of things that educators I work with have read, and fundamentally they all have one thing in common, which is that we have to have high expectations. We have to help the kids understand that they are capable of more than their socioeconomics would predict they're capable of, more than what they believe they're capable of, and that is foundational to any ability to have success in any way, shape, or form, in particular with math. Move forward, please, Taylor. So the ask I have of everyone is whatever you think, when you look at a kid, whatever you assume that child is capable of, if we all just assumed a little bit more, I think we would accomplish a lot more, okay? And again, if you click forward, please. So one way that this plays out, when we don't have high expectations, one of the unfortunate ways this plays out with teachers, I think, is as follows, as reflected in the study by TNTP, called the Opportunity Notes, which I recommend if you have time. They tracked a bunch of school districts over a year-long period and get a lot of information, qualitative and quantitative. And they cut the data by classrooms that were predominantly comprised of students of color and classrooms that were primarily comprised of white students. And what you see here is that 38% of the time, the classrooms that were predominantly comprised of kids of color, those kids received 0 grade level instruction. And the comparable number for the students primarily comprised of white students, the number was 12%. So that doesn't make any sense, right? I'm the 5th grade teacher. Are you telling me that in 4 out of 10 classrooms for students that were primarily of color, that they're receiving 0 grade level instruction? How is that possible, right? It's possible because teachers have low expectations of what the kids can handle, and they want the kids to feel successful. So they give them stuff that is easier than grade level rigor, right? That's what's happening. And it's a byproduct of us having low expectations for kids. We just don't think they can handle more, so we don't challenge them. If you look on the next slide, what we find out is if we look at that same data and we give them grade level rigor, we give them grade level assignments, the kids of color were successful 56% of the time, and the white students were successful 65% of the time. I'm not saying we're going to throw big parties with those numbers, but I know this. That gap is smaller than most other gaps I see when I look at data broken out by race, by a long shot, number one. And number two, as a former teacher, I look at that success rate and I think to myself, I can work with that. I can fix that. I can get those kids where they need to be, right? So because we have low expectations for kids, we don't think they're capable of more. We are too often giving them stuff that's just too easy, in particular with math, I would say. If you go to the next slide, please. Now, why is that? So if you look at this, this is from one of our pieces of curriculum in math. If you look in the middle of the page, those are the 4th grade units I, a 4th grade teacher, are going to teach over the next 4 or 5 weeks, okay? To the left are all the standards and lessons that are prerequisites to those lessons. And to the right are the standards and lessons where I'm going next. So you see 4th grade in the middle, you see some 2nd and 3rd on the left, you see some 5th on the right. 4th grade lessons is showing where I came from and where I'm going, okay? The problem is this. If the kids can't handle the lessons in the middle, the teachers move to the left. They look for those prerequisites. And guess what? There are many more prerequisites than there are lessons I need to teach over the next few weeks. So they end up spending all of their time on the prerequisites and they never get to the grade level rigor. You can move forward, please. There's a new study out called the iceberg problem. One more, please, Kayla. That talks about this and depicts it visually. So you see in every state test in the country, fewer 8th graders pass than 7th graders and fewer 7th graders pass than 6th graders. Okay, that's denoted by what's above the line in the iceberg problem here. And what's below the line are all the prerequisite reports. There are all the prerequisite skills. Those prerequisite skills are where teachers are spending all of their time. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, you can move forward, please. To the next slide, please. Just keep going, please. So how are we trying to help address that particular issue? Well, what we're doing here, what's happening here is when teachers are making choices between teaching below grade level and teaching at grade level, some teachers make tremendous choices. Some teachers don't make great choices, right? And the reason for that variability is a lot of those choices are based off intuition and hunch. What do I think will be most practical and efficacious for those kids? What really, but what we're saying is what would be better is if data helps make those decisions. So in our particular program, we have an assessment that produces multiple outputs that support instruction. But one of the things it does is it actually breaks out, if you look under current unit on the right, that's what I have to teach today. Well, to the left are all the prerequisite skills that a student needs to have in order to receive the grade level instruction effectively. If you move forward one click, Kayla. And then what we have is for each of those skills, we tell you in group A, B, C, and D, which kids fall in each group, and we tell you among each of those skills, which prerequisite skills do the kids have and which ones do they not have. What it allows kids to do, or teachers to do, is to know, it allows data to make the decision about what prerequisites, what below grade level instruction kids receive, and it allows them to be surgical and efficient about it. Okay, so instead of intuition, it's data, and instead of trying to teach every prerequisite skills, it's select and different for every child. I think I'm close to my time, so if we could just move forward to the next slide, Caleb. So again, my overarching message is that, let's try to assume kids are capable of more. If we do that, I think we'll make very different choices instructionally that will serve our kids well. And I apologize for the technical problems and for going fast, but if you have any questions about what I talked about or anything else, please note my contact information on the last page. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Woody. I know that was like record time as you went through that, and there was a lot of important information, and we'll definitely be posting and sharing that as well, along with your contact information there. So I do not have any slides here, so Kayla, you can just, we'll keep that with you. What I just wanted to basically do before I introduce Steve, that's going to really talk about the principles around integrated STEM, I wanted to do just a little bit of framing of the STEM Leadership Alliance and why this is so important. The STEM Leadership Alliance really built as a collaboration that included the major STEM organizations, the National Science Teaching Association, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association, which we will be hearing from the executive director, Steve Barbado, and then the American Society for Engineering Education. And these organizations really came together because it's about advancing the work of educators and students across the country. And by working in this type of collaboration there, we really have that ability to reimagine what STEM education could look like. And so Steve's going to talk a little bit about that, but before he does, I want to share that this collaboration also includes educators, it includes industry, it includes nonprofit organizations, museums. It's really a way of looking at these associations are kind of the gatekeepers around defining STEM within their silos, but also looking at it across the disciplines as well. And I think the real importance here and why there's such a need is that STEM is far too often thrown around as an acronym. And that acronym has now watered down the meaning of STEM. And we hear everything from STEM degrees to STEM and STEAM and STREAM, and it should be this, and it needs to include robotics, and it needs to include coding. And the reality is that it just becomes a word. And so what the real goal of the STEM Leadership Alliance here is to start to break that down, to put some real power around it, that it really starts to connect the dots for students. And so this isn't just another buzzword that we like to use, but we like to think of it as integrated STEM because it's those authentic connections that bring literacy. It brings the numeracy into the picture. It includes art. It includes physical education. It includes social studies, all of those other classes that are there as well. And so that's the real component of what we're trying to push for. And I'm very pleased to say that I just returned along with Sal Fernandez from STEM Happens Network from the Philippines. And they just had their first integrated STEM summit in Asia. And the amount of work that we're seeing and the drive and the passion that we are seeing from educators to implement this with fidelity in such a rapid fashion that they take the learning so quickly, that this is something that all countries are looking to change. They said, we're tired of having STEM just thrown out there as this word, but we need to start to get action so people really can understand that. So I want to pass this over to Steve. You will find he's very passionate, but he does a beautiful job kind of framing these principles and really talking about that. So with that, Steve, I'm going to turn this conversation over.
The International Technology and Engineering Educator Association, ITEEA, has been around for 82 years, and it used to be the Industrial Arts Association, turned to Technology Ed, and in 2010 we added the engineering. It's a integral part of everything that we do to teach about technological and engineering literacy from our perspective through an integrated approach. So this project that we're going to be talking about today and these three principles fit us real well, but it fits all of STEM real well. And with our association, we service teachers pre-K to 12, as well as those that prepare teachers in higher education institutions across the country, as well as internationally. So we were part of the STEM program in the Philippines. We have a center in Nanjing, China. We have a couple other affiliations, one in Thailand and a few others. So we focus about 85% of our membership, though, comes from the U.S., and then we go from there. So there's a lot of resources on our website. I encourage you to take a look at that and take advantage of it. Even if you're not a member, you can download and see a lot of good stuff that's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. STEM to the fourth power, the power of collaboration for change, came about because Texas Instruments came to us in 2017, actually, along with the Advanced CTE Group, which is the administrator group of the American Career and Technical Education Association, and the state supervisors of mathematics, which is an arm of NCTM, and the state supervisors of science, which is an arm of NSTA, and then us, to try to come up with a way that we could jointly agree on what the issues are surrounding STEM and what people need to focus on, understand, know, and put together. So these associations came about as a group to work on that. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but we took about 14 months of meetings, face-to-face as well as online, to try to pull that together. The chief state school officers was a part of that group as well. And as we ended up moving forward with all of this, we came up with three major issues that are not going to be a surprise to anyone. There is overall lack of STEM preparedness in the world, especially in the pre-K-12 system. Many STEM careers have not yet been envisioned, and there's a lack of equity for sure. And we saw that in the previous presentation, obviously from the economic perspective as well as everything else. Setting the stage, we looked at things like the top 10 skills in 2015, compared them to 2020, and you'll see a lot of those things in there are the soft skills as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And the recent surveys that showed that acknowledging this is not enough, that we have to take action. So everybody can get a copy of these slides, and you can download them. Just put STEM 4 on our website. You can download it. I believe, Kelly, you have them on the STEM Leadership Alliance website as well. So you can get all the details and the full report. And I sent the link yesterday for the full report, because the full report gives details on each of these items that are in these bullets here that show that just acknowledging it is not enough. So let's get into these three main principles, because I think it's going to help encapsulate why this paper is so important, not just to sit on paper, but to be carried out in policy thinking, in educational practice, as well as through government and policies that happen in the pre-K-12 as well as higher education system. Principle number one is very straightforward. STEM education should advance the learning of each individual STEM discipline. So when you think about it, and we just saw that presentation in mathematics, every mathematics teacher, every teacher that teaches instruction in mathematics has a content that must be delivered. Why is that? It's there because there has to be a set of foundational skills in mathematics that provides a progression of learning from those early years in preschool all the way up through grade 12 and then into higher education. They build on one another. Same thing in science. When you look at biology, chemistry, physics, earth and space, environmental, as well as all the other science areas that stem out of there, I'm using that in a punny way, they're so critical to understand the individual content that's being taught there. And then we move into the technology and the engineering components and the content that's taught there through the engineering design process, through the systems model when you're developing technological devices to help the human-made world to understand the natural world and combine it. And all that content needs to be learned so that there is a presence of understanding, a foundational set of skills in each discipline so that we can move on to principle 2. So that first one says, if I'm teaching chemistry, this is just one example, and I'm teaching gas laws, is that part of STEM? Am I teaching STEM? The answer unequivocally should be yes. So if I'm teaching algebra, is that STEM? The answer is yes, and it fits in principle 1. It's important, it needs to be recognized, understood, and it needs to be well embraced as we move forward. And I'll go through all three, and I think it would be good to open it up for any questions that you have based on these. Principle 2 says STEM education should also provide logical and authentic connections between and across the individual STEM disciplines. So this is that integrated approach. This says we should engage children early on and all the way through their schooling in real-world context, real-world challenges, and have them think and act like an engineer. Have them understand that the T of technology is a big umbrella, and it's more than just computers and devices. It's any human-made adapted device to help humans do anything they need to do. And from that perspective, the appropriate math and science should be taught and connected. I'm not sure if you guys know Roger Bybee, but Roger was one of those sort of forefront people back in the day that came up with that 5E lesson planning model in science. And we added a sixth one to that, and we made it the 6E model. We added engineer, and it's a small e. And the idea there is to make the engineering, not that everyone needs to become an engineer, it would be great if a lot did, but that everybody needs to think like an engineer and act like an engineer to be able to be successful in today's world. So in Principle 2, we're talking about authentic and logical connections between and across disciplines, and we're connecting that learning and bringing in the appropriate science and math as it's being taught with all four areas together. So that's Principle number 2. Principle number 3 is STEM education should serve as a bridge to STEM careers. This is a very simple sentence, right? It is a very complex delivery system, though. Teaching careers doesn't mean that you just expose them to it while you're teaching about a lesson. That's one part of it, but it has to go much deeper and broader than that. We actually have to be able to expose children to careers, but also have them thinking about careers that do not exist today. So when we do that, we have to be able to set it up early and often throughout their schooling, that children see that careers are always changing, and it's their responsibility to be thinking forward and thinking about how their career choice, how their career that they're seeing can morph into a variety of things as they move forward. And they can actually connect it to Principle 2, because Principle 2 gives them that help to be able to show that if I'm a computer science person, and I'm dealing with a system, and all of a sudden that system deals with food scarcity, all of a sudden I've broached into that whole area of life science that's so well connected and so important to our daily lives. So they have to be thinking better than we can teach them about careers. They have to be learning and applying better than we can teach them about careers. And then why does it matter? Well, first of all, we've got to engage students. And engagement is a key point. We have to do it in logical and authentic ways. Relevance, we have to make sure that the teaching and learning sequence that we have has a distinct and identified progression of learning. We have to make sure that all the content that is there is real and can be done across the board in urban, suburban, and rural areas. And then funding opportunities. We're talking about, with this bullet, leveraging this paper, leveraging your groups, leveraging the knowledge base that's built within this to carry through and help dollars and other resources to go into schools to help them understand this process. The recommended actions then are there to ensure high quality STEM learning, increase access and equity for students, and provide professional learning opportunities for teachers as well as other informal educators as well. So the question becomes, our world stands to benefit from education models that produce STEM literate students who demand the integration of knowledge to master complex problems. The key is this: we need to be able to engage them in integrative ways so that they can take it forward better than we can deliver it. So let me move on. I have put these principles here, and I'm not sure how much time I have, Kelly, overall, but there are some examples and some actions that are here for each one to help with that. You can see those as we go down through. And then we can open it up for questions if there's time.
Yes, there is. And we actually had quite a list of questions that came in when individuals registered. So I'm going to ask you a few of those, Steve. And if anyone on the call, if you do have a question, we encourage you to use our chat room so that you can just send us a notification there. And I think you can also there's a way that you can just kind of flag us if there's a question as well. And Kayla, maybe we'll just unmute the lines in about 10 minutes to see if there's anyone that does have a question there, or you can just flag us there.
Great, sounds great.
The first question that we had that I think really tied in very nicely, Steve, to what you were just talking about is it came from, so you gave some examples there, but how do we change this idea of, you know, we teach in terms of topics, and so STEM gets taught into this vacuum, and you gave some examples of that integration. And so it's more or less, how do you change that mindset was really the framing of the question there. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm reading between the lines a little bit with that question. So if I head down the wrong road, let me know and I'll readjust. But I'm thinking most times when I talk to educators specifically, elementary, middle, or high school specifically also, they tell me that they're overwhelmed, that they don't have the time to figure all this out. And so the question becomes, how do I teach the content so the kids can still do well on the norm reference testing that's out there and all those kinds of things, versus how can I expose them to maybe a problem-based learning kind of activity that engages them in this integrated approach? And the deal is this: you have to take a step in that direction and then let it happen as it moves forward, and trust that the students will learn the content if you intentionally identify it along the way. So one of the biggest fallacies that I see that it reinforces the negative side of doing problem-based learning is that teachers sometimes, we as educators, assume that just because they're doing an activity, they're going to learn all the intended outcomes from it. We have to make sure we intentionally teach them those outcomes. So let's use the following as an example. If we have, let's say in the third grade level, we're reading about Charlotte's Web, the book Charlotte's Web. And in there, we have Templeton, who is a character in that story. And there's a fair that's going on, a town fair kind of thing. And there are a design brief that we used to do at the elementary level in the district I was with, where they had the students create a safe environment for babies to be moved around from one area to another without things bumping into them, falling into them, et cetera. And what we had to make sure of is that we intentionally made sure that the content from the math perspective that was connected to that, with the ratios and proportions that they were starting to learn in third grade, and introducing them to the concepts of different materials and their properties in science, were absolutely intentionally delivered as part of that problem-based learning. So as the students put together their vehicles and their devices and their protection areas, they were able to learn the technology and engineering during that, but also intentionally learning the content that still needs to be taught within that curriculum. Does that help address that as an example?
That does. I think that's very, very helpful. And I think it leads very nicely into this other question that we have, is that, you know, we think about secondary STEM education. So how do we convince schools to break down STEM silos when post-secondary admissions seem to be aligned to those silos? So I think it's taking this now one step further.
Yeah, so I feel very strongly that one of the first steps that should happen is that districts that have the ability to have department meetings, I know not all do, but most do, in mathematics and science and so forth at the secondary level, should not always meet as individual departments, that there must be intentional and forced meetings together with an agenda and topics on how they can collaborate and create these integrated experiences. So one of the first things I would recommend is to have at least monthly, at a minimum, meetings that have the science, technology, and engineering teachers and the mathematics teachers meet as a group, with sharing what's happening in their programs and see where the connections can be, and then use that as a stepping stone to maybe map the curriculum to provide those authentic and logical and sequential experiences for students.
That's great. Thank you for that. I want to jump. I have another question I'm going to send to you, Steve, and then Woody, I do have a question for you as well that's come in too. Steve, another question is, you said about the STEM careers that oftentimes it's just kind of mentioned as, here's a job, right? So here's a biologist, or here's, an airplane mechanic or a biomedical engineer. And oftentimes we really don't get deep into that to really drawing the connection. So oftentimes STEM careers are not always appealing, or it's not relative. And I think we also tend to put STEM, when you're competing with after-school programs like sports and entertainment and where kids' interests are. And so you talk to a child and they say, I want to be an athlete, or I want to be this. But how do we make STEM careers more appealing and relevant? And we don't just kind of showcase it, like you said, to say, well, here's a sample job. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it takes a focused, and this is going to be a little bit of an oxymoron, focused shotgun approach. So picture a shotgun, right, with all these pellets going out. I think you have to provide a broad experience, a variety of careers in a variety of ways all the time. But at that same time, you have to bring in the reality of it. And that's where I think local resources loom large, as well as using the communication technologies that are available today, like a WebEx, like a Zoom, and those online learning experiences, to connect with people in a variety of careers and have them share their experiences directly with the students, and allow that to happen as the core of learning, rather than just the topping on like the whipped cream on top of a sundae. It should be integrated all the way through. So to bring in and expose them to a broad variety of careers all the time, but also provide local real experiences and connect it to the activities that they're doing.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would just add, one example from this past summer, one of the breakout sessions that occurred actually they were doing a demonstration with roller coasters, and they actually had a roller coaster engineer that participated in the session. And I think that sometimes we don't always think about how do we include the local community and local parents in terms of an activity, or the work that we're really doing, trying to showcase here's the math and here's how this all connects, and bringing in those individuals. And there's easy ways to connect it, either through your students and seeing what parents do, or also through LinkedIn and other social media channels. And that's how we actually were able to use some of the individuals this past summer.
So Kelly, it's Soraya. It's Soraya. Can I just jump in here, because this is our sweet spot. So basically, with NBC Learn, we've been struggling with this question, and we've gone to conferences where the conundrum really is that in the best school communities, they can only really offer apprenticeships to a handful of kids, right? I mean, if they partner with the business community and the tech community, they can set up field trips, and they can do some one-on-one. But in terms of real hands-on mentoring and apprenticeship, it's just a few kids, which is really tough. I think that's really the challenge. So what we've done is really profile, and that's the collection we did, Discovering You on Engineers. We profiled 30 young, diverse engineers and really told their story, how they got there. We also focus group tested it with the National Science Foundation to find out, especially around girls, why would a girl go into engineering? And it turned out that girls look at things a little differently. They want to improve lives, help others, mentor, communicate, be creative. And so we looked at engineering through through the prism of those words, basically. And those are the profiles we created, and showed girls how you can touch on all the things you want to do, how STEM can actually be a means to an end. It's not a study in itself. It's actually a pathway to get to do what you want to do and really fulfill your dreams. So that's been incredibly successful. And we can bring in, those 30 profiles. We actually have about 500 of them all together, and we show them through NBC Learn. But what we've also done with schools is offer career days. So what we're doing this week on Friday is having 100 Brooklyn students into NBC at 30 Rock, And we are bringing in the people in front of the camera, the people behind the camera, and the people who do tech, so that they understand how STEM relates to actual jobs and people that are doing those jobs. And we've carefully picked people that are young, diverse, dynamic, engaging to talk to the students about that. So we're actively trying to tackle that question. And I agree with Steve, it has to be multi-pronged. I mean, you've got the apprenticeships, the mentoring, the partnering with the business community. We bring the videos into the classroom. We bring people into NBC. We've actually talked to a lot of our affiliates. We have 200 news affiliates. And when we partner with schools, that's something we talk about as well. How can we use the local affiliate to show kids these kinds of jobs and show the path to getting there?
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Soraya. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because you do have a wealth of resources that really, really tap into that career lens that can be utilized, that I think brings it to life a little bit more than just kind of reading a little job description on what this is. So I really appreciate that. I think that's great. Woody, I want to turn this over. This next question was for you. And it was really about how to use data to break down these silos. So we just heard about these 3 principles there, and you started off kind of talking about the zip codes and the divides and what's happening there. So what are your thoughts in terms of leveraging data to break down these silos, and that we really start to see the integration, and that we're looking at literacy and numeracy and science, but we're looking more at the whole child?
Right. Just to clarify, Kelly, you mean breakdown silos across the different departments and functions?
Yeah, across those different content areas. As Steve was kind of showing, one, we have to respect, you know, science is science, math is math, literacy is literacy, so on and so forth. But then 2, if we really want to have those authentic connections, how do we use data to really make those connections authentic?
Yeah, so that's a tough one cross-departmentally, but, you know, I would say it's just a matter of integration and planning. I mean, there are usually plenty of opportunities to think about integrated curriculum across those groups. I think the important thing from my perspective when we look at data is not just to say, not to group kids or group initiatives based on just overall science scores, overall math scores, but to be able to be a bit more in depth in terms of looking at geometry scores versus number and operations versus algebraic thinking. Having a little bit more depth to make those connections feel more palpable and more data rich, if you will. I know it's tough, but you know, I just want to be cautious about making sure all that good effort doesn't produce something that feels superficial, but feels like it has some depth to it. I think that requires getting one click below just looking at math or science and looking at specific skills in terms of development needs across different departments.
Thank you for that. And I think this leads in really nicely back to you, Steve. One of the other questions we had is, how do we encourage underrepresented student populations in state to take STEM classes, and how do we support them? And I know Soraya talked about women in STEM, and that always goes back to data. I mean, I think this is one of the things that's so incredibly valuable and important, is that we also, we have to understand the data to understand what is those connections for our students. So Steve, how do we encourage more underrepresented student populations to take STEM courses, and talk a little bit about even what ITEA is doing?
You bet. So first of all, the piece in the slides that Woody was showing earlier about not underestimating students and encouraging them to go beyond their grade level is really important, and that starts early. So that's first and foremost. But sometimes the resources that are available may not be equal in terms of the amount of resources to each individual child. And it's really critical that we understand that, and that it might take more resources for some students to get to where they need to be. And then once they're there, they can run with it. And there's a tipping point with each child as they go through that. And that's the hard part in today's educational system, in my opinion, in terms of this equity and getting minority students and different from a gender perspective, from a race and ethnicity perspective, from an economic disadvantage perspective, those opportunities are critically important from an early age all the way through. So some of the ways that we can do that is to, first of all, break down the barriers and take away some of the prerequisites that are needed. Oftentimes there's prerequisites for courses as students are getting in through middle school, starting to select their high school courses that basically will just not even give them the opportunity to select a course because of prerequisites. And oftentimes those prerequisites are there just because they've been there in the past, not for a lot of reasons other than that. And it's important to try to take those prerequisites out of there. At the same time, we have to be careful not to undermine the foundational skills that those prerequisites represent and make sure that we provide some just-in-time teaching about the concepts and content that's being taught at those levels when needed. So that becomes a timing issue of delivery, and that's why that integrated approach is so critical. We can identify if there's an algebraic concept that needs to be learned and reinforced at that time, it's important to do it. I'm going to use an example that our teachers from ITEA say all the time, especially 9th and 10th grade teachers will say, none of my students, and they literally mean none, 0, can measure to a 16th of an inch or measure appropriately to 1,000th of an inch if they're using a vernier caliper kind of thing. And the answer to that is if they haven't done it over time in a variety of contexts and practiced it, they haven't touched it for a long time, they're not going to remember it. So I think we have to make sure that we build in opportunities to reteach and relearn those areas that we often know are barriers, and measurement is a big one. As the students get up into high school is just one example. Additionally, we have to be able to, besides lowering the number of prerequisites out there, we have to provide courses that are exciting. So for instance, this whole idea of computer science in today's day and age takes on a whole new meaning. Right now at ITEA, we have an NSF grant that we're taking an existing course that was funded by the NSF out of Stanford University called The Beauty and Joy of Computing, BJC, and it's an AP computer science course. And we've got a grant through Hofstra University and the NSF to rewrite it from a technological and engineering perspective with the products and practices that are being delivered in this course. And we're also doing it in a variety of demographic areas throughout the U.S. and different levels of economic regions with examples and exemplars as they go through the lessons. I think seeing themselves as well as the context and areas that they're from is very important in terms of helping more students want to get into the STEM fields.
Thank you for that. And I could not agree more. And I think, you know, I want to kind of wrap up here and just answer. There was, you know, other questions just about the Alliance. And I think one of the things you were talking about, you know, those barriers there and those prerequisites, I think it's something that we do have to look at and address. And part of what the STEM Leadership Alliance is really trying to do is to take all of these best practices of integrated STEM, working with leaders committed to integrated STEM, which includes in school and out of school, and it includes K through 12 and industry and everyone, that we start to have this conversation, and that it's not just happening within a classroom or within a school and being a project there, but that we're really starting to see those authentic connections. And it was wonderful to see this past summer, even to see in the Philippines as the associations worked together, did these integrated STEM activities that really showed the depth that you could leverage in science and math, and really bringing in the technology and the engineering practices. And it was an incredible learning experience for the educators, the principals, the leaders that we had in the room. And so the more that we do to showcase that, the better we are. I want to take this as an opportunity to thank Soraya, to thank Woody, to thank Steve, to thank the entire NBC Learn team, Kayla and Sal Fernandez and Rosa, Lagana from the STEM Happens Network as well for putting this together. This was our first one, so we had a little bit of technical issues there, but we fixed it rapidly. We want to continue this conversation in January, where we will have PSE&G will actually be showcasing some of the work that they're doing. And again, NBC Learn will be our partner in hosting this. And I just ask everyone to save the date, July 12th to the 16th. We will have our summit in Orlando, Florida. We will also be able to have a global presence at this time. If there are any other pressing questions, I encourage you to send us a note. We had a couple others that came in, and unfortunately we're just so tight on time there, but what we will do is we'll answer those questions, because we had about 25 questions that came in prior. We had another handful of questions that came in during the call. I know there was one on vocational education and a few others as well. So what we'll do is we'll post those responses on the STEMleadershipalliance.org website so that we can get to any of your questions that we did not cover. I know that we got pressed for time there. I wanted to turn this just back over to Steve. Any final comments and thoughts there? And then I'll turn it back over to Woody and Soraya so we can just kind of wrap this up.
My takeaway thought for this kind of thinking with integrated learning and these three principles is to make sure that the conversation doesn't stop with one activity, one win, one little blast out there. It has to be something that has sort of like the Angela Duckworth grit and the perseverance and passion and that kind of thing. It's got to have a progression to it, and it has to be steady and move forward all the time. That's the key.
Thank you for that. Woody, any final comments there?
No, just I appreciate what Kelly, what you and NBC Universal and everyone's doing to get people to focus on these issues. I appreciate the ongoing dialogue, and incredibly appreciative for everyone digging in and being committed to moving the dial here with STEM initiatives. So thank you for hosting.
Great. And Soraya and NBC Learn, again, we really appreciate you for your generosity and just helping us to launch this. And there's a lot of admiration for the work that you're doing as well. And so I want to just turn it over to you so you can do the final closing for us.
All right. Well, Kelly, I think we're all big fans of yours or we wouldn't be here. I think you've really held the torch for this, and it just listening to all this makes me think that in so many ways it's just common sense, right? Especially as the world is changing and technology is changing, and kids have to be prepared, and this is a really good way to think about preparing them. So we're all on board, and we appreciate all the work that you do, and thank you all for your really interesting comments and remarks and decks, and it's a lot to think about. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This is a slow and steady process here, and education must change, and we do need to continue to work on those silos, but the only way we can do it is through a collaborative effort where we all work together. So stay tuned for more information. If your question was not answered, again, we will be posting responses on the STEMleadershipalliance.org website. And again, I want to thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And we'll be kicking off our next series of calls in January. So we look forward to speaking to you then. And PSE&G, we look forward to having them as our partner as well at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.